Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Today, on this Wednesday, January 22nd, a snowy January 22nd in Houston. At least some of it's still on the ground, although it is melting quickly. The Rockets are scheduled to be back in action tonight against the Cavaliers. At least they are as of our recording date, knock on wood. Hopefully that will be the case and stay the case, that is, because we don't want to see the Rockets having any more back-to-backs added to their schedule. They already have a makeup game in Atlanta slated for next week from a game earlier this month that was postponed due to ice and snow in the Atlanta area. So hopefully the Rockets don't have one of their own to add to that mix as well. Hopefully all of you listening are safe and warm. It's definitely been a chaotic week around these parts. Anyway, this is going to be our first full show at the Lager Line with both myself and Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. And while Paulo's been under the weather this month, but he's good enough to resume playing now. So, Paulo, before we get into topics on the court for the Rockets, who are 28-14, number 2 in the West as of our recording time, although the schedule is about to get much more difficult. Before we start with basketball analysis, Paulo, are you officially off the injured list? Are you still dealing with discomfort? What's your status moving forward in your availability?
Yeah, at this point, I would say the designation is probably probable, I'll say. So I'm not healthy. All of the symptoms, I have just a nasty. I think it was a cold of the flu. I don't know what the translation is, because we have two different words in Portuguese, but it's like the more severe one. And so it's been like 3 weeks and I have none of the symptoms, just a nasty cough that won't go away. So, but I'll try my best for you guys not to notice. I'll just try to mute the mic if I ever have to, and we'll try to fix it in post-production. But yeah, I think at the very least, I'm well enough that my brain's back to working, so I can actually do the pod. Because when I get sick, listen, it's complete shutdown. I don't know if in the US this is a stigma, but in Portugal, there's a whole kind of meme that men, they struggle as much with a cold as they struggle taking a shot, like actually being shot. So because I don't know, maybe it's an entire thing that men are like, I guess I'll say men are like pussies when it comes to dealing with colds. And so we just completely died. Like, who can't think, can't work, can't do anything. It's just completely useless for a week. But I'm back to at least of being a functioning human being.
So you're basically in Tari Eason mode, in that you're probably going to play, in that you're good enough to provide value and you're not going to make it worse, yet you're still not 100%.
Yeah, but I hope that this isn't a multi-year thing.
It shouldn't be. There was actually a good article that Daniel Lerner of the Houston Chronicle had on Tari right after he came back last week. And Tari actually, this goes back to one of our pods a few weeks ago when I said that one of the unfortunate things was that with these medical situations, the people who actually know are not Ime Udoka, it's the medical staff, and they're not made available. So we don't often get insight on what's actually going on. And the player involved, who second to the doctor would know the most, is also unavailable because he's recovering from injury. Well, Daniel Lerner of the Chronicle, beat writer now that Jonathan Fagan has retired, talked to Tari, and Tari said basically he's got a titanium rod in his leg now. So it's not like last year. It is very different. It's just a matter of pain tolerance. And, as Steven Adams has alluded to, with these lower leg injuries, there can be sort of a 2-year recovery process. And this was year 1. It stiffened up a little bit during that awkward break in the schedule between the NBA Cup and the schedule resuming right before Christmas. And while not 100% now, I think reading what Tari said, I feel more confident that he's not going to make it worse. This is not the stress reaction he had a year ago, which was constantly at risk of breaking and requiring surgery, which ultimately it did in early March, ending his season. This is something different. I can't tell you 100% that it's going to be fine, but he thinks he can play on it. And to Tari's credit, he's looked very good in the 3 games since coming back. It's not like he's come back and then been, a partial participant. I guess they are limiting him to 25 minutes per game for the time being. But other than that, in terms of how he plays in those minutes, to me, he looks like himself. And that's a silver lining for this team. Anyway, I'll let you guys hear more from Paolo on this pod because with Paolo under the weather, you've heard a lot from me in recent weeks. So I'll try and be a little lower usage here so that Paolo can be higher usage or as high usage as he can stand given his limitations at the moment. And as far as where we start our discussion, it's been a mixed bag for the Rockets. There's clearly some good. Look, they hit the halfway point on pace to win 56 games. They're still at number 2 in the West, even with a bad loss to the Pistons at home on Monday. By the way, it's funny, the Rockets opened the first half of the season with a bad loss at home to Charlotte. Now they open the second half of the season with a bad loss at home to Detroit. Pistons are a better team than the Hornets, but they're certainly not a good team by any stretch of the imagination. But the larger point, it doesn't have to define your second half of the season in much the same way that loss to the Hornets didn't define the first half. Every team can have a bad night or a bad day in this case, because it was a matinee game on Martin Luther King Day, the holiday here in the States. So I wouldn't make a mountain out of a molehill with that one game, yet the Rockets have lost 2 of their last 3. So depending on how you do the framing, you can look at it a little more pessimistically, especially because the schedule is about to get much more difficult. 2 against the Cavaliers on the schedule, then 1 in Boston against the defending champs, then night 2 of a road back-to-back, that makeup game against the Hawks that we just referenced. So that's the glass half empty view, but the glass half full view, look, Jalen Green is reigning Western Conference Player of the Week. The Rockets went 3-1 last week, and the only loss was night 2 of a road back-to-back in Sacramento. No Fred VanVleet, terrible officiating, and yet you still had a chance in the final seconds of that game to tie it. And I think by and large, the good outweighs the bad. Again, that's not to say that there aren't some potentially ominous signs in there, but when you zoom out, I think over the last week or 2, however long it's been since we've recorded, or really however long it's been since we've had an episode, because I did have a couple of solo things in between the last show for Paolo and myself, I still think as of our recording date, at least on January the 22nd, the good outweighs the bad, 28-14, number 2 in the West, although they do have Memphis and Denver hot on their heels. The one area of concern I have, so it's been a very good stretch for Jalen Green, Western Conference Player of the Week, but really going all the way back to Thanksgiving Eve. He's been a very efficient player. We've talked about it. His rise has been enormous for this team, not just in the micro, but the macro as well. He's becoming a candidate potentially for most improved player in the league, I think. Paolo, you can expand on that if you want. I think the Jalen upturn is very real. However, there are some concerns with Alperen Sengun. His last 9 games, he's shooting just 47% from the field. For the season, he's below 49 now against the Pistons. Look, the Rockets entered as the best rebounding team in the NBA, and I think technically they still are, but they were out-rebounded 52-39, and they just could not handle Detroit's physicality. That's what Ime Udoka said after the game. Pistons won on the glass by 13. Sengun had, I think, 8 boards and shot just 5 of 14 from the field. Meanwhile, Jalen Duren went 8 of 8 and had 14 boards. Sengun's downturn has been a story for a while. It just hasn't meant a lot in terms of wins and losses because Jalen has been playing so well, and obviously Amen Thompson, since replacing Jabari Smith Jr. in the starting lineup, has been incredible in his own right. So it hasn't really cost the Rockets in terms of wins and losses. However, the struggles for Sengun, and I'll say that the defensive and the rebounding issues against the Pistons, that might be a little bit of an outlier. But in terms of finishing at the rim, that's been a struggle for him all year long. We've talked about it, and we've said that over time it should correct itself, this issue of Sengun missing bunnies, and yet we're now past the halfway point of the year, and for whatever reason, it hasn't. And that's not to say that Sengun's having a bad year. I still think he's the leading all-star candidate for this team, and if the Rockets stay in the number 2 or number 3 spot in the West, I think they're highly likely to get an all-star. So let's not act like that Sengun is having a bad year. Yet I also think it's fair to say that he's playing below his potential. And I think Alpi would say the same thing if you asked him. He thinks he should make more of those shots. He doesn't think he should go 5 of 14 against the Pistons in a game that was there for the taking at home. So I guess my question for you, Paolo, is how you sort of balance what we've seen over really not just the past week, but the entire month of January, which is the ascension of Jalen Green and Amin Thompson, but also a little bit of an underwhelming performance from Alperen Sengun, and especially within the context of not just this season, but really the entire careers of Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green. Because there's been this nagging question all along, which is, can the Rockets get the best version of those two players at the same time? We talked about that as one of the key things to watch entering this season. And we've always said that on paper, there's no reason why their games can't be complementary and that there just needs to be a larger sample of both near peak form. Yet here we are midway through year 4, and it feels like we're still sort of having these same discussions in that Sengun had a strong month of November, but Jalen was playing well beneath his potential. Since then, Jalen has been a lot better, but Sengun hasn't been quite the same guy. So we're still waiting to see both in peak form at the same time. You see glimpses from time to time. You see certain games here or there where it looks really easy. And again, on paper, I don't see a reason why they can't coexist. But in terms of the big picture, it feels like we're still waiting for the first sustained stretch where both of them are in, A-level form for a sustained period. I guess there's two ways you can look at it. The glass half empty way is, yeah, we're midway through year 4 and we're still having these conversations. The glass half full way is, look, the Rockets are 28 and 14, number 2 in the West, even with this low hanging fruit that they can potentially get better if they just get their 2 best offensive players, or at least 2 best scorers, on track at the same time. So Paolo, what's your view of sort of all those competing interests in how things are coming together or not coming together as we enter the second half of the season?
This is kind of like a state of the Rockets type of segment. So I think the overarching point that I wanted to make, that I was making a week and a half ago and getting absolutely like decapitated for it on Twitter, but I think people are coming on to now, is that there's been a trend. Typically, I don't know if you guys remember my point. I used to say that there's no trend with Jalen Green. But with this team, there's been a trend that's been very easy to track, where his effort has been on the downslope for a good month now. And it coincided with Jalen Green's outburst. And so there was so much that could be improved by at the time, by replacing Jalen Green with just an average shooting guard. Well, we not only do we get that, we got an outstanding shooting guard, an all-star level shooting guard. But at the same time, and the reason that some of these games remained close was that the defense fell off a cliff. And not just the defense, just effort in general fell off a cliff. You can say that Tyrese getting injured played a factor. Yes, it did. Jabari Smith getting hurt played a factor. It did as well. Or perhaps it made it so other guys had to, increase their effort level, and that has, worn out on our team. And I think that's mostly what's been happening. And I think this tracks with everybody on this team. But I think especially so with Sengun. And I know people will just pull up my track record and say that's because I hate Sengun or whatever it is. It really isn't. It's very logical, because Sengun, the way we were playing to begin the season, is the guy or from who it is most effort is demanded on a game-to-game basis. He is the focal point of the offense. He's either posting up, which is a very high energy type of play, because he has to literally be fighting with the other center, and the NBA has a lot of physicality. So there's that aspect of it. When he's not posting up, he's either running dribble handoffs or running pick and roll. So he's always moving on offense. He's always touching the ball. And then on defense, he's obviously he plays drop sometimes, but he's obviously having to move around a lot, and every single possession, unless our guys can keep their matchups in front of them, involves Alperen Sengun, right? And I think most teams, when they look at the Rockets, they will try to target him as, kind of the weaker link in a team that has a lot of really good defenders at this point. And he had been answering with, or at least defensively, passing with flying goers up until, about a month ago. And it started declining then. And we started seeing this phenomenon where
By the way, to your point, let me jump in real quick. The Rockets are not a top 10 defense in January. Just wanted to add some statistical data to that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that matches the eye test. And I think everybody would agree that the defense has just fallen off a cliff. We were giving up 40-point quarters. And we do sometimes, give up a 40-point quarter and follow it up with a 20-point quarter. Which means that, it's not, I don't think and someone was telling me this on Twitter earlier today. I don't think our defense has been figured out. I think it's just that we're not able to play our defense, and we can only do it for small stretches because I think the team, it's not that they're tired, and I don't think it's something that you fix with just a game off here or there. I think you could have prevented this by doing that up to this point, but I think doing it from now on is tough because I think it's more jadedness or compound fatigue than it is just guys, not being 100% as far as recovered from the game before. And so I think it's just that, and it happens a lot in I always wondered how it didn't happen in the NBA, but it happens a lot in football or European, so soccer, in which as the season wears out, teams kind of start falling off as effort-wise. And I think that's what's been happening with the Rockets, and I think the All-Star break is going to be really good because it's a few days, it's almost a week.
It's more than a week. It also comes at a time in which the Rockets lost Jabari, and so there's no obvious hedge if the Rockets start getting attacked with Sengun and pick and rolls, because it's not like you're going to drop in Steven Adams and the defense is going to be significantly better at that specific limitation. I think sometimes in the past, teams might be a little bit tentative to truly target Sengun because there was this obvious counter, especially in high leverage spots, that Ime Udoka could turn to. Well, now if there's no Jabari at the 5 lineup, you're more likely to see Sengun or Steven Adams, but realistically, Steven's limited by matchups and minutes. Realistically, it's Sengun, and so teams are much more likely to sort of spam the hell out of those actions because without Jabari, there's just not a counter that Ime can turn to. I think your point on effort is valid. There's a lot to that, but also personnel. Since losing Jabari, there's also not a counter, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you can really tell that this is something that's going on just because I don't think it's how do I say it? I don't think it's lack of commitment. I think it's just, especially with Sengun, if you pay attention to him specifically, I think he's just a second slow everywhere. It's not just on defense, on offense as well. He's missing some reads that he typically makes.
And maybe that factors into the shooting percentage.
Yeah, and I think I'll get into it offensively with him, but I think defensively, you often see like guys that should not be quick enough, and especially not this new version of Sengun that we've gotten this season, should not be quick enough to get by him, are getting by him, and he's rotating late to guys driving. He's giving up fouls on charges that he shouldn't be giving up. He's getting late and fouling guys and giving up end ones because of it. I think it's exactly that. It's that he's tired, right? And rightfully so. It's why I advocated for, if you give him 5 games of rest throughout a season, that's a game every 16, 17 games, 18 games.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of manage this jadedness since the beginning of the season. And I get what Ime Udoka is doing because this seems very new to being good. And so you want to extract as much use as you can because you don't quite know if it's real until you do it throughout an entire season. But I think you watch him play and it really feels like he's just a little bit out of sorts because he's the second late understanding everything that's going on. Make no mistake about it, the perimeter defense hasn't been as good. The defensive rebounding, I don't think, has been as good, at least from the eye test perspective. And then offensively with Sengun as well, and I don't want this to look like I'm just singling out Sengun because he's not the only one. Dillon Brooks has been awful for like a couple of weeks now. But offensively, I feel like you can tell a little bit of this jadedness and this cloudiness in his kind of response time, because the passes that he's hitting are the ones he, typically since Ime Udoka has been on the team, has hit the most often. So it feels like it's predetermined. He knows that pass might be there, so he looks for it and he gets it. But when he's faced with a new situation, where it's a new guy that's open, whether it's weak side corner, even sometimes strong side corner, it's kind of crazy. He's missing some reads on guys that are teams are helping off of just one pass away the corner of the side in which Sengun is on, and he's not seeing that. He's not kicking out quickly. He's taking a few seconds to do it. But the passes that he does make instantly are, kickouts back to Fred VanVleet. those ones that are still there. The dump offs to the dunker spot, those are still there. Hitting cutters when they do cut, which is not a lot, but those passes are still there. He's missing some of the reads to the other shooters on the floor. And I think it's that jadedness combined with a little bit of a new shot profile. I think because now he has that floater that's more of a go-to, even when he's posting up, the little baby hook that he does. If you throw it back to year 1 and year 2 Sengun, yes, he did have those moves occasionally, but 70% of the times he was scoring, he was posting up guys and backing them all the way back under the basket, and then having the little spin moves right and left and getting to the basket that way. And actually, very little of it was these mid-range floating type of shots. First we saw the flamingo come into play, and now he has a lot of that push shot that he does off of the pick and roll and then the little baby hooks. And because those shots are shots that he can get a little bit further away from the basket, when he's faced with resistance and more people packing the paint, he can still get those shots off. They're a little bit tougher, but the shot selection still works. 2 years ago, he didn't take those shots at all, or very few of them. And so I don't think it clicked as an option as much. And so he would look for the pass more, and he would, more instinctively find these shooters. What's happening now is that because he has that as a weapon, and it's okay that he shoots those shots, he's not looking to see who's open as much when people collapse on him in the paint. At least that's my theory on it, right? And that combined with a little bit of jadedness and kind of fogginess in his thinking as he's playing is leading to missing some of these windows. I don't think it's a problem long term. I think it's something that he can work on, and it's something that I'm sure in the offseason, because he probably doesn't have the time to address it too much now. But in the offseason, for sure, it will be a sticking point with the coaching staff. Hey, yes, you're good at this post little baby hook. You're good at these push shots. You can even get into the flamingo, and most of the time it's a good shot. Even though it's a shot that you know how to take now, it's lower in the pecking order of an offensive outcome for a possession than it would be to kick out for an open shooter. And that's something that he needs to really get his mind to, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty positive outlook, because it sounds like what you're saying, and I think I'm largely in agreement, is that it's not really about any changes structurally to the team. It's not like that dialing up Jalen's usage is materially changing the shot profile or the opportunities for Sengun all that much. It's not like replacing Jabari with a men is making it that much more difficult for Sengun to have the room to operate. Basically, this is stuff within Sengun's control, and time will tell if he's able to fix it this year or if it's something that he needs an off season to fix. But it sounds like what you're saying, and I'm inclined to agree, that it's less about, the coaching staff. It's less about how Jalen and Amin and Jabari and his teammates are being used or not used. And it's more about just technique for Sengun himself and how he attacks, right?
Yeah, I think I'll equate it to what it would be for a shooting guard, right? Let's say a shooting guard works on a step back three, right? And he's a good step back 3-point shooter, but it's not necessarily the best outcome for an offensive possession. It more times out of 9 times out of 10, kicking it out to an open. If you get let's look at James Harden. He gets doubled, right? He has the space to pull up and hit a step back three. But there's an open shooter, and it's 9 out of 10 times it's better to hit the open shooter and get an open shot, or hit Capella on the roll, than it is to step back into a jump shot. Even though you're good at step back jump shots, even though Sengun is good at the push shots, even though Sengun is good at the flamingos, and these are valid shots for him, the kick out to an open man is still a better shot. And so you should still do it. And it's he'll learn these new shots, and they are okay for the offense. It just needs to be instilled in him that even though they are good shots, better shots may be available. It's as if Sengun learned the step back three, as if Jalen Green learned the step back three, and all of a sudden he's just spamming it. He's not even driving to, even if it's a slow matchup, even if he's being guarded by a bit, he's shooting step back threes anyways, instead of trying to blow by the guy. Well, it's a valid outcome, but it's not the best outcome, that the best shot that you could have gotten. That's what I'm trying to get to, so people don't overanalyze what I'm trying to say.
And As far as the defensive limitations, I really do think some of these have been played up since losing Jabari Smith Jr. because the value of having those Jabari at the 5 lineups, it's not just realized when Jabari is on the court in those configurations. It's also the optionality and what that means to other teams. Because if that's something you fear, you might not want to spam the living hell out of every Shingun action up top if you think Ime Udoka's got that club in his bag potentially. Whereas when there isn't an alternative, you're much more likely to just lean into exposing Shingun, exposing Steven Adams in whatever actions you can, because there's not realistically another alternative. We saw for stretches against the Pistons, the Rockets actually tried Tari at the 5 lineups, but that's going to be more difficult for a lot of reasons. So I think having Jabari back, not only are there some games, some matchups where it benefits you to play that way, it also potentially benefits you beyond just the lineups that Jabari is at the 5, in that the option of that for Ime Udoka and the Rockets can enter and affect and influence the thought processes for other teams and how they attack, because they may not want to force the Rockets into those types of lineups if it's going to make the Rockets do something that in the long run, especially if it's super high leverage, do something that might make life more difficult for them. The reason I've been thinking about this a little bit more, besides the fact that obviously Shingun had a bad game against the Pistons. So we're at the midway point of the year. So it's a point in which there's a lot of bigger picture reflections, state of the Rockets, as you put it. We're also coming up on all-star selections. The starters are actually named tomorrow. The Rockets will not have any of those. Reserves are named next Thursday, the 30th. I think if the Rockets are top 3 in the West, they're likely to have at least one. Most likely Shingun, a small chance of Jalen Green because he is the leading scorer. And if Jalen has some big games against the Cavaliers or the Celtics, and all of a sudden he's the leading scorer on the number 2 team, and he's still on a sharply upward trajectory and doing it against big time opponents, there's a small chance that Jalen Green could sneak in there. But I think more than likely it's going to be Shingun, because it's not, in most cases, just a half-year award. With All-Stars, there's a certain narrative component to the voting, and Shingun just being on the radar last year when he was much more efficient and wasn't having these issues nearly as much, the fact that Shingun was in the conversation a year ago is going to put him much more on the radar for the coaches around the league that are voting on these teams, as compared to someone like Jalen, who has come on very strong, but just within the last 6 to 8 weeks. So I think Shingun is still the odds-on favorite for narrative reasons to get the all-star spot for the Rockets. I think it's too soon for Alperen Thompson in year 2. And I don't have an issue with Shingun being an all-star. I love the guy. I hope he is. And if I had to bet, I think he will be an all-star. I think it'll be deserved. I'll be happy for him. And so I've thought about that lately. However, earlier this week when I was on Jackson Gatlin's Locked on Rockets podcast, he was doing a mid-season review, and he asked me who I thought was the most valuable player on the Rockets. I thought about it. The obvious answer would be Shingun. And I went in a different direction, partially because I didn't want to be boring. I knew that's who Jackson would take, and he did take Shingun. But I also think that when you look at some of these deficiencies and you strip away the narrative components, when you strip away strictly the counting stats in terms of who has the best package of points, rebounds, and assists across the board, and you look at who actually impacts winning the most, I went with Alperen Thompson as the Rockets MVP, because I think he's foundational in terms of his impact on you defensively. And even though the defense has slipped a little bit in January, look, they're still top 4 in the NBA for the season as a whole. That's the foundation of this team. He's provided value, and yet he's also really dynamic offensively. And we've seen that since we replaced Jabari in the starting lineup. He's basically averaging like 17 points, 11 boards, 3 or 4 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals a game ever since becoming a starter. I personally don't think they're going to be able to take him out of the starting lineup, but that's a different discussion. But I just think when you factor in all the value defensively, the versatility, being able to guard 1 through 5, it's almost like, to me, there's been 2 iterations of this Rockets team. The first 20 games, which were about the Terror Twins and just being so disruptive defensively, with Sengun doing the heavy lifting on offense. And then the second 20 games, which were all about Jalen Green. And Amen has fit in both of those configurations. I think clearly, I don't agree with the framing I've seen from some that Jalen needs Amen to succeed. No, Jalen had really started going off prior to Jabari going out of the starting lineup. I think Amin helps Jalen some because Amin's a really good basketball player, but I think Amin helps everybody because he's a really good basketball player. But the larger point, to circle back to our discussion about Sengun and this team, I really think you can make a case that Amin has been the most valuable player already on this team, especially now that he's averaging right at 30 minutes per game. I think for stretches of this year, when he was limited to 26, 27 due to coming off the bench, you could say that even if he's the most impactful player on a per minute basis, which I've said for a while, you would have to lean to Sengun or Jalen, one of the 33, 34 minutes per game guys, simply based on the totality. But now that Amin is starting and now that he's going to eclipse 30 minutes per game for the foreseeable future, to me, there's a strong case for Amin as your most valuable player. And that's before we even talk about Jalen Green, who I think certainly has an argument as well, given the workload he takes on offensively and the ability to score at all three levels, especially in crunch time. Somebody the other day showed me the numbers in the last 5 minutes of close games, and Jalen has been significantly better than Alpi in those situations, I think, because he threatens the defense at all three levels and has gotten a lot better at getting to the free throw line and making those free throws. So you could make a case for Jalen as well. I would lean him in because of the defense, but it's not like Jalen's the defensive liability he's been at times in his career. There's a reason why Ime Udoka isn't pulling him from those closing lineups anymore. But it's just sort of fascinating to me in that narrative-wise, it feels like Sengun is going to be an all-star. And whenever the Rockets go on TNT, which they were last week, there's an obvious Sengun all-star case that gets made because he's the most visible player on a team that's exceeding all expectations. Yet when I look at this team, I don't think it's a given that he's the most valuable player on this year's team. And that's not to say that he can't be in the second half of the year if he makes the type of improvements that we've been discussing. That's not to say he can't be in the future. But right now, I mean, I think it's pretty close. And I'll say, there's people in the building that I've talked to inside Toyota Center that agree with me. Now, that's not to say necessarily that's Trofell Stone. I mean, to be clear, people in the building, there's a lot of different perspective in basketball operations. And so it's healthy to have different views. And then ultimately it's the job of the GM to sort of hear out different arguments, different valuations, and then come to a conclusion. But I know there's people inside the building that view Amin as already their best player and already a star level player in the NBA. So I'm curious your thought on the MVP of the Rockets through the first half of the year, because it's sort of interesting to me in that, gun to my head, I think Sengun is going to be a first-time All-Star next week, and we're going to celebrate that. Yet I'm not even sure he's been the best player on this team this season. How do you sort of balance all of that?
So if you had picked Sengun, I was gonna go with the man Thompson. But since you picked the man, and that I think you can make a very good argument for Sengun. And I'll go with Sengun. I think I see your point with the man, and as I said, I would have made the argument for him had you taken Sengun. But I think honestly, it has to be Sengun, not necessarily because he's played the
And
best.
and because only one of us can draw the ire of Turkish fans on social media / YouTube. That was another thing I didn't realize before making that argument on Locked On Rockets. Boy, the YouTube comment section is skewering me. I might be banned from making a trip to Turkey this summer. But
I
yeah, so let me take the heat, and you can get on the good side, man.
Listen, I think it's way past it for me for me being on the good side. I don't think there's anything I can do, and I kind of I don't want to be on the good side because I don't want to kind of they're not the Sengun only fans are not, let's say it, nuanced enough to be able to hear something that's not pure praise and take it as you know just an opinion that's not just absolutely shitting on Sengun. I'm not gonna be, I'm tired. I'm tired, and I've been tired of the entire dynamic. So, what I will say is that the argument for Sengun, and I think it's a valid one, is that I don't even think he has played the best on this team. But I think he is the most valuable because, as I said before, he is involved on literally every action defensively and offensively that this team takes.
And there's a certain gravity to him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, if you're literally involved in every single thing the offense does, and on defense, you've had a massive leap, there's really no argument to be made. It's kind of like, oh gosh, let me anger the two most toxic fan bases in the NBA all in one fell sweep. It's kind of a little bit Russell Westbrook-y, in the sense that so much runs through him that he has to be the MVP, even if he might not have been the best player on the team so far this season. Even though you can make an argument for other guys, that just so much running through him that brings value. And I think you can make the argument that Sengun has been our floor raiser, and that and that Jalen Green has been our ceiling raiser, and that Dillon Thompson somewhere in between. And I think that's a fair statement, but at the same time, the team's not the team loses more wins from losing Alperen Sengun than it loses from losing a man, or than it loses from losing Jalen. That's the beauty and the downfall of a guy that's a floor raiser. It's that, well, or that has been a floor raiser this season. I'm not deeming that he's going to be a floor raiser going forward, but that's what he has been. He brings a lot of value, but it's not he's not accepting. He's not out of 100, he's bringing like 60%. He could be bringing 80%, but the 60% he's bringing, nobody else can bring. And I think if you don't have Sengun, I don't think Jalen Green can provide that type of value, partially because he plays a different position. But that's why, it's very hard to argue against, for example, Jokic for MVP in most seasons, because he has to do a lot. He's the center. The center has a critical role in every single possession, offensively and defensively, for good or for bad. And so because of it, he brings the most value on the team. Even though Power Lord Shea would be my pick for this year, but it's mostly because of team record. And so I think it's hard to argue against Sengun for MVP, even though if I were building a team, I would always start by the ceiling raisers and then get the floor raiser. But I don't think you can argue that the floor raiser isn't the most valuable just because of the sheer volume of value that he brings, rather than, and I think this applies even when Jalen Green has been awesome. I think if you have an awesome Jalen Green and no Sengun versus what the version of Sengun that we have had and no Jalen Green, I think the team with the Sengun that we have had over a large season with the same supporting cast wins more games.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Although I will say that if Jalen can sustain his level of true shooting for another 10 to 15 games, so now since Thanksgiving Eve, the last 23, he's at almost 25 points per game on better than 61% true shooting. If he does that for 35, 40, basically approaching half a year, I don't see how it can't be Jalen at that point. But again, we can have that conversation in a month, right? Like, I think with Jalen, we can acknowledge the positives and say, you know what, let's just see how long this run lasts. And it's already lasted longer than runs he's had in the past. So that's the source of encouragement. But if this continues into the All-Star break, then I think at that point, it is clearly Jalen Green's team. For now, though, it's sort of an interesting debate because you can make cases, in my opinion, for all three of these guys, right?
Yeah, and if Fred hadn't been so off, we could have made an argument for him as well, from the perspective of the same perspective that Sengun has as a floor raiser.
Okay. And I guess to close the loop on my men comments and probably finish out this episode, are you in agreement with me that there's just no way he can come out of this lineup? I mean, no disrespect to Jabari, because I don't think it would have to be Jabari that goes out. I think you can make an argument for Dillon Brooks as well. I just think it's more likely to be Jabari because I think politically he's younger. There's another year 3 guy in Tari Easton that you can point to and say, look, Tari's a fabulous player. He comes off the bench. It's not a shot at you. I think it's just easiest for Jabari to be the guy that goes out because, especially if the Rockets are winning games at a high level, you can say, we're just going to stick with what's working. And Amen Thompson is clearly working. That's not a shot at Jabari. That's not a shot at anyone. You just need to max out his minutes. And if he's coming off the bench, he's going to be capped at about 28 minutes per game, because the only way he's going to get to the 36 plus he needs to maximize the Rockets and their abilities as a team is if you're not artificially saying going into every game he's not going to play the first 6 minutes of the first and third quarters because he's not starting. And obviously he's not going to play the final 18 minutes consecutively of each half. So because of that, if you want him to play in the 36-minute range, and actually been playing closer to 38 to 40 since joining the starting lineup, that's how good he is, that I feel like he's got to be in the starting lineup. And the news that came out in recent days that Jabari's not going to have surgery, he's not going to have a pen inserted into his fractured hand, they're going to let it heal naturally, that doesn't significantly impact the timeline, but it could add another week to it. And so because of that, I think it's more likely that Jabari is out through the All-Star break. And if that's the case, when he comes back in late February, you're going to be basically just 6 weeks from the start of the playoffs. So at that point, if you've been going for almost 2 months with this configuration of Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Amen, and Sengun as your starting five, and assuming you're not hemorrhaging games at that point, assuming you're winning games at a respectable amount, I think you say, you know what, this is who we are right now. Maybe it's not who we are in the off season or by next year. Maybe there's deals that happen in the off season that change how this team looks moving forward. There's also, the Rockets will never say this, but there's also the benefit of, if Jabari and Tari's minutes are capped, which they are a little bit at the moment, then it helps you in potentially contract negotiations this summer because, the counting stats to warrant super huge deals on extensions. The Rockets will never say that. I don't think they would let that influence their thinking, but it certainly can't hurt. I'll tell you that much. But I just think with the men playing at the level that he is, unless the team loses a lot of games or unless the level of his play goes down, I don't see how they're going to take him out. And that's not a shot at Jabari because, again, it doesn't have to be Jabari that goes out. I don't think there's really a huge difference between Jabari and Dillon Brooks in terms of their value to the team this season. I just think by circumstance, it's likely to be Jabari. The bottom line for me, Thompson is just too good not to play at least 36 minutes per game, assuming he's healthy. And I just can't see a man coming off the bench again for the Rockets. Am I off base in that?
I think if we're serious, it's Dillon Brooks. But yeah, I don't see me doing it until at least we reach the playoffs. And even then it would be a stretch. So and this is going to sound really crazy, I would probably move a man back to the bench. It's
Really?
and I think you've got to find a way. And it's one of those things where you point out an issue and you don't have the solution. But you've got to find a way to play him his 30 whatever minutes it is. Even if, maybe you start Dillon, but you start the third quarter with him, and I don't know what it has to be.
The only thing that I could think of, and the Spurs did do this when Ime was on their bench, there were times that even though obviously Manu Ginobili was their sixth man, they would bring him in crazy early, like at the 8-9 minute mark of the first or third quarter, specifically for that reason, because they weren't going to be able to get him anywhere near mid-30s if you waited until that under 6 timeout. And, the counter argument to that is, you want to let your starters get in a rhythm. And if you're going to make a sub that early, why wouldn't you just change your starting lineup? But I don't know, if you think for one reason or another that it makes more sense to bring him off the bench, I guess you could try. Again, it's not unprecedented. The Spurs did this at times with Ginobili. It's just you would have to find some way to insert him earlier than the under 6 timeout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
Because he's not going to play 18 consecutively.
Yeah, but I think the most important point is that I think this stretch has shown how important Jabari is towards rebounding on this team.
Yeah.
That especially with the effort problem. And I think that's, Jabari being hurt, I would assume he comes back off with a lot more energy than what the other guys who have played entire season have done, unless there's some conditioning issue. I think it has really, come to the forefront of my attention that he's really, really, really important, even if it doesn't necessarily show up on the box score, just on the general way that this team plays in size and everything. And I think if Ime Udoka truly wants to win the most games that he possibly can, I think you start a man and Jabari and you bring Dillon off the bench. And you could even sell Dillon on a roll like that by saying, hey, if you come off the bench, you'll have more offensive freedom to get your own buckets than you do now. Especially because, listen, and in the Pistons game, this was driving me insane. We believe a lot of matches for Dillon Brooks are mismatches, and they are not. Like, Dillon Brooks on Tobias Harris is not a mismatch. Tobias is not a good defender, is not that great of a defender, but he is strong enough that he'll hold Dillon in the post. And the Dillon fadeaway mid-range shot might be, an acceptable shot from time to time where the defense start expecting it and they're not draped all over him. But he took some terrible, terrible, terrible shots in that Pistons game. And so, listen, if you're gonna hold people accountable, you gotta also hold accountable your vets as well. And I think Dillon is a lot easier to make the argument for benching than Fred and Voigt would, for example.
And I think you could make the case that Dillon's creation in the half court, which was something I think we both talked about early in the year, was a little undervalued by Rockets fans, that you needed him in these sticky situations in the half court to bail you out. That might be a little less important now that you have this version of Jalen Green. And Amen Thompson is taking steps forward offensively as well. He's not a super great creator yet, but he's getting better at those little push shots, going downhill, doing a few more things on ball. And then you combine that with Jalen being much more consistent. Not that Dillon was ever like an upper echelon offensive creator or bucket getter, because clearly he's not. But there were definitely times early this year when you needed him in the half court to, bail you out of sticky situations. And that maybe now, if you have Jalen in peak form and you have Amen getting better, maybe you don't need that as much late in close games, right?
Yes, and I think this is something that should be revisited once we, reach the playoffs, because, and this was another point that I was making that I forgot when I talked about the entire dynamic between Four Wizard and Ceiling Laser. When it comes to the playoffs, we are going to desperately need a half-court creator from the perimeter, as we have, earlier in the season, but even more so. And at that point, you could make the argument again that you should move a man back to the bench and you should start Dillon Brooks because of that dimension that a man doesn't bring. Because a man, he's gotten better. He's one of the best finishers at the rim, inflated by how many dunks he gets, but you're not going to get that from a man in a half-court setting in the last 5 minutes of the game. And so because of it, the argument could be made that in the playoff setting, you could slot Dillon Brooks back into the starting lineup because of what you're saying, because of the fact that he, is a better initiator and a better bucket getter than the man is. But I think at this point, if we're being honest with ourselves, and if he is being honest with himself, you have to bench Dillon Brooks. And even from a long-term perspective, I mean, if you bench Dillon Brooks, now you have one vet on the floor, and this team will probably be better than it is as currently as their current version. So what does that say about the future? That the best version of this team no longer is reliant on having two of the three starters being vets and shouldering such a heavy load as those guys have done, which has been decreasing, but still.
Actually, it's interesting that same since Thanksgiving Eve stretch that we reference for Jalen so frequently. Dillon in 20 games since, he did miss 3 with a minor injury. He's shooting just 34% from 3, which isn't bad, but it's not the clearly above average level that he was at earlier this year. So if that trend persists, then he's, certainly not a liability as a 3-point shooter, but it's not like he's been a marksman for a while. He hasn't been that 38 to 40% guy that he was to start the year. If the 34% that he's been since Thanksgiving Eve over his last 20 games is more indicative, then maybe that adds to the case as well that he's someone you could consider taking out. It sounds like we're largely in agreement. You've got to play him in 36 minutes, and, regardless of if it's Dillon, if it's Jabari, if it's, you do something crazy like the Spurs would occasionally do with Ginobili and bring him in at the 8/9 minute mark of the first and third quarters, then you do it. But regardless, you've got to play him in at 36 minutes, right? Like, I think that's a better way of putting it than saying Amen's got to start. I mean, he most likely needs to start. But the bottom line is, at this point, if the Rockets are serious about making noise in the playoffs, you've got to play him in at 36 minutes. That discussion is pretty much over at this point. The idea that you can only play him in 28 minutes. That's a better way of putting it, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think something else that comes to mind that might be important on the start versus bench discussion is how do you factor Steven Adams into it? Because I think a man plays better when he's with Sengun than when he is with Steven Adams. Although he does play with Steven Adams as well, they're not mutually exclusive. But I think he brings more in those lineups. And so if you want to maximize or rather than maximize time with Sengun, if you want to minimize time with Steven Adams, you're probably better off. You have to start him, basically.
It's a really good point because the conventional wisdom on Rockets Twitter has become, oh, you just let it ride as is and bring Jabari off the bench, and you can make Jabari, in addition to his minutes at the 4, your backup 5. Well, if you're making Jabari your backup 5 and bring him off the bench, how are you going to slide in Steven Adams, who legitimately has been a good player for this team, and I know internally has a lot of fans. They want to be able to play that style in certain matchups that are less conducive for Alperen Sengun. So if you're bringing Jabari exclusively off the bench and trying to factor him into the 5, how does that work playing 3 centers? That's another argument potentially for keeping or trying to find a way to keep Jabari in the starting lineup, right?
Yeah, and I think, listen, at this point, Steven Adams is in full, up and running mode. He is a beast, and he's as much of a beast as I remember him being with OKC and with the Grizzlies.
He looks like himself.
He's 100% back. And, the only thing I can add on Steven is that I made the argument earlier in the season that they should extend most of the vets for one more season, even if it's not guaranteed if they can. If they can get Steven Adams at the same money he's making right now, that's a no-brainer. He's still a starting level center in this league. And it's just really hard to quantify what he brings to the table because he's not necessarily a great defensive big, right? Doesn't have the best hands. He doesn't, shoot free throws very well. It's just he creates extra possessions and he makes it so much easier for Jalen Green to play basketball and any of the guards that are playing with him. It's kind of like he has gravity. I think this is a cool analogy. I think he has gravity on the perimeter as opposed to most centers who have gravity inside it. So he generates spacing because of that gravity that he has on the perimeter. Because when he's setting a screen, everybody's worried about what's going to come out of that screen. And then some of it is reputation. But some of it is just that I don't know what he does. He just generates massive advantages and gets extra defenders to be paying attention to him. And it's in a weird way. I think I've never thought about it this way up until this moment. So I'm sorry if the point isn't too, well articulated. But when you look at Sengun, right, he doesn't set the hardest screens. He tries, but he mostly has to be setting moving screens for them to be that effective. And even then, sometimes the guards just get around him. He generates his gravity as a roll man, and he generates his gravity as the post player. That gravity, draws defenders inside. Where if Steven Adams sets a screen, 2 steps away from the 3-point line, he's drawing defenders out of the paint. The threat is not that he's going to roll. The threat is that he's going to generate so much space for the 3 that you have to commit, extra hard to the guard. And even if he isn't the guy finishing the play at the rim because he's not the best finisher unless it's basically wide open, he also has, and we've seen this, especially in a couple of games ago, I can't recall the team, there was a couple of highlights plays, as a short roll passer as well. Because he generates that space, he's wide open, he makes the right decision out of that short roll. And so it's just a completely, I think this team breaks a lot of my preconceived notions about basketball. Or I guess I'll say this team takes advantage of a lot of things that are very unique to its players.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't really turn into archetypes. Right? Sengun generates a lot of advantages that are just really nuanced and that you can't really. He's not Sabonis, he's not Vucevic, and he's not Jokic. It's different type of center. He brings little different things. Steven Adams is not your run and dunk screen setting rim running big. But he does set excellent screens and he is an excellent offensive rebounder. And it's a weird combo because there's nobody like him in the league. Man, Thompson is the exact same thing. He can get downhill and finish at the rim, but he can kind of only finish at the rim in certain situations, right? There's types of contests that make it a lot harder on him versus others. And the whole offensive rebounding component of the entire team changes a lot of things as well. Dillon Brooks is not Robert Covington. He's not PJ Tucker. He's not Luke Bahamute. He's not Daniel House. He is a 3-and-D wing, yes, but he's not necessarily the best on ball on guards anymore. And on offense, he's not threes and layups, and he can be pretty effective in that in-between game as well. And he's more comfortable shooting threes in different situations versus your typical 3-and-D wing, and he can put the ball on the floor. He's a little bit different than either a defensive wing or a 3-and-D wing. Fred VanVleet is a pick and roll operator and a dribble handoff operator that just cannot finish at the rim whatsoever. And he shoots really, really deep threes. And he has, I think on most occasions, his long twos are good shots for this offense. And it's just not quite like you can't really fit him into any type of archetype. There's not really any other Fred VanVleet around the league that doesn't have the volume that he does. Jalen is, playing as is a 60% true shooting guy, but it's not like he can just, against any matchup, get his own at any, reliably, even when he's hot. Like his shots have to come in a specific way for him to be really effective. And even getting to the rim, it has to be the right angle, and it has to be the right type of contest for things to go right. And there's types of defenders that really, really give him a lot of trouble. It's not Cade Cunningham-esque. It's not like Kyrie. It's not like James Harden. It's not like any of these. It's not like Zach LaVine. It's not like any of these types of prototypical shooting guards. He's not necessarily a dribble pull-up guy. He's not necessarily a gonna finish through you guy. He's not necessarily an excellent touch at the rim guy, but he kind of combines little traits and little facets of all of these types of players. And I think with this team, sometimes it's hard to have an argument with people who don't watch the team every night, because we just really extract value. We squeeze out value out of the most weird, non-replicable traits of our players, right? And it just works together. And it's why a guy like Steven Adams just really can't be taken out of the lineup, because he brings a lot of value. It's just really hard to pinpoint and quantify what it is.
Yeah, it's value not just individually, but what he means for the collective. And I think that's a good place to leave off, because we can revisit this in a week. I think when we talk more about the trade deadline, I think Steven in particular, but also, as you mentioned, guys like Jae'Sean Tate, Jeff Green, the other expirings, it's sort of intertwined with what the Rockets do or don't do, because if you don't do anything major, you need to consider at least, one or two of those rolling over the salary so that you have that tradable filler into next season as well if you don't make an impact deal at this year's trade deadline. Again, we're punting that for next week for a couple of reasons. I think we haven't heard much concrete in terms of the Rockets' plans to this point. Next week will be the week prior to the trade deadline. The deadline is Thursday, the 6th of February. So next week will be about 7 to 10 days ahead of that. So that's where you might hear some more juicy rumors around not just Houston, but the entire NBA. So we could have more info, some tidbits to react to. But in addition to that, we'll have more information on the Rockets as a team, because I think while we're largely positive right now, 28-14, number 2 in the West, the next week is not going to be easy. Again, you've got 2 against the Cavaliers, best record in the NBA. They may not have Evan Mobley, but they're still really good. Just ask the Phoenix Suns, who they blew out the other day. You're going to have 1 in Boston against the Celtics, and then night 2 of a road back-to-back in Atlanta against a winning Hawks team. So if the Rockets go 0-4, 1-3 in that stretch, and you combine that with a loss to the Pistons, maybe we're thinking not so optimistically the way we have been in recent weeks, with the Rockets far outkicking their coverage in terms of, performance relative to expectations this year. I think we'll learn a little bit more, for better or for worse, over the next week, and then combine that with getting more information in terms of trade rumors about the Rockets or other teams, and that'll make next week a more opportune time to talk about, trade possibilities leading up to February 6th and what the Rockets do or don't do. And if they don't do anything major, then of course that could perhaps play into the calculus for retaining guys like Steven Adams, not just beyond the deadline this year and playing the minutes, but into future seasons as well. There's definitely a case for that with Steven in particular for basketball reasons. We can talk more about that next week when we start to see how the trade deadline might take shape and how that might influence things. Until then, that's where we will break. And until that next show, we'll hope for the best with the Rockets playing these really good teams without Jabari Smith Jr. Other than Jabari, they do appear to be healthy. Amen had a minor issue with his calf last week, but he's off the injury report, so knock on wood. Hopefully he's put that behind him, and Tari Eason off the injury report as well. So hopefully that continues. You can get back to Terror Twins basketball, and maybe the Rockets can get back to closer to the 4th-rated defense they've been for the season overall and the 12th-rated defense that they've been in January. That's the hope. We'll talk more about that over the next week as we see how the Rockets do against these upper echelon teams. Anyway, until that next show, this is where we'll break. And if you want more content between now and then, the best place is always to get it is on social media. Best place is Twitter/X, where I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo's on there at Paolo Alves NBA. You can get our real-time reaction during games and, of course, during any breaking news involving trades or anything else around the NBA. You can also go to this podcast page on Twitter/X at The Logger Line, where, of course, you can get episodes right when they come out. But beyond that, we have the link tree in the bio. You can find links to all our partners, friends, sponsors of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up their content and enjoy them as well. That would mean a lot to us, and you would help us keep going as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. You can also find our distributors, links to places like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you've not already, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review. That's another way we can look good to those friends, partners, and sponsors and keep this program running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. With those flights complete, we'll adjourn for tonight. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always to you for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of The Logger Line.